Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're tackling something that is universally painful, yet honestly completely fascinating. We're talking about post-breakup silence. You know the exact kind I mean, right? The relationship has ended, but the communication didn't just naturally fade out. No, it hit a brick wall. It stopped abruptly. And suddenly, you find yourself stuck in this weird standoff where neither of you is reaching out. It's like wandering through a complex psychological maze. But understanding the architecture of this silence, that's your way out. Okay, let's dive into this.
So here's the thing. There's a particular kind of silence that absolutely does not feel like peace. Instead, this silence just feels like waiting. After a breakup, when neither person makes a move, something highly unusual starts happening inside our minds. This specific kind of silence stops being just a lack of communication. It morphs. It becomes this heavy, palpable presence. It's literally something you can feel in the room with you. And strangely enough, it becomes something we fiercely protect. Because think about it, you aren't staying silent because you've moved on. You're staying silent because breaking it first would mean admitting something you just aren't quite ready to face yet. Psychologists actually have a name for this. They call it the no-contact deadlock. Now, what makes this so vastly different from your everyday post-breakup distance is this element of mutual strategy. See, the silence was never the original plan. You didn't sit down together and agree to it, but accidentally, it's become a defensive position. Both people independently pull back. Both use the silence as a psychological shield. And deep down, beneath our conscious awareness, both parties truly believe that the first person to reach out is the one who loses. So nobody moves. To really grasp why we get trapped here, we need to look at three invisible psychological forces driving this entire deadlock. Force 1, ego as protective armor. And this brilliantly illustrates our first point. When we hear the word ego, we almost automatically think of arrogance, right? But in the context of a breakup, that is absolutely not what's happening. When a significant relationship ends, your mind immediately goes into overdrive, constructing a defense mechanism to preserve your self-worth. In that wounded state, reaching out first signals vulnerability. And to a wounded mind, vulnerability feels exactly the same as weakness. So your ego steps right in to act as your armor. Both people hold their ground, sure, but they aren't doing it from a place of strength. They're doing it from fear. It's the fear of appearing to need the other person more than they need you. But here is the deepest paradox of this whole dynamic. The very ego that's protecting you from looking weak is actually keeping you totally frozen. You aren't operating from true strength or real independence. You are standing very still in a pose designed to look like freedom. You're literally trapped by your own defense mechanisms. And you know, that leads us perfectly right into the second force keeping you stuck. Force 2, the phantom attachment. Behavioral science reveals a really fascinating truth here. We human beings don't actually attach to people directly. Actually, scratch that. It's more like we attach to our mental models of them. When the contact stops, the real, flawed, complex person begins to kind of fade from your memory. But the internal representation, what we call the phantom, well, that actually becomes more vivid. In the silence, you don't necessarily miss who they actually were. You miss what they represented. Security, validation, the evidence of being chosen by someone. And the catch? The phantom never, ever disappoints you. It doesn't pick fights over dirty dishes. It doesn't leave your texts on read. It just remains quietly perfect and available in your mind.
And because of this phantom, both people subtly keep the metaphorical door cracked open. Think about it. If you reach out and get a cold or negative response, you risk permanently killing that perfect phantom. You risk closing that door forever. Both people often leave this door open, not out of some grand, calculated master plan to get back together, but simply because closing it completely requires a type of courage that is just incredibly hard to access right after a profound loss.
Force 3, the digital surveillance loop.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because this is where our modern world totally complicates everything. The truth is, silence is rarely ever complete anymore. It just means watching without being seen. It's a remarkably predictable progression. Step 1. You check their social media occasionally, just a quick glance, no big deal. Then, step 2, you're monitoring them frequently. And finally, step 3, you start interpreting completely normal everyday behavior as highly meaningful data. A lack of posts? Oh, they must be depressed. A sudden burst of posts? They're totally overcompensating. You find yourself constantly gathering data about their internal state. Science actually has a name for this. It's called hypervigilance toward attachment cues. It's a documented, very real response of the human nervous system. When a primary attachment figure is suddenly ripped out of your life, your brain basically refuses to accept the loss right away. It goes on absolute high alert, continuously scanning the environment for signals. And this surveillance loop is exactly what sustains the deadlock the longest. Because as long as you're watching, you haven't fully left the relationship. The silence isn't an ending, it just remains a covert strategy. So, the big question is, how do we finally escape this?
The 2 clean exits.
Escaping the no-contact deadlock requires some pretty brutal honesty with yourself about the real reason you are still sitting inside that silence. The deadlock only really ends through one of 2 clean exits. The first is reconnection. But listen, this isn't reaching out because you panicked or because your ego just couldn't take the silence for one more second. No, it's a deliberate, clear-eyed decision. You are choosing, not losing. It's all about your emotional posture. You reach out clearly, and you return to your own life regardless of how they respond. The second exit is departure. Now, this isn't a dramatic final text or a loud public performance of moving on. It is a quiet, private, and very genuine internal closing of the door. It's the deep, honest recognition that the relationship has truly reached its end. Grief moves. Habit simply repeats. If you take absolutely nothing else away from this explainer, please let it be this. Grief has a direction, you know? It processes, it evolves, and eventually it moves you forward. But if you are just standing completely still in the deadlock, endlessly scanning their social media, aggressively protecting your ego, well, that is no longer grief. That has just become a habit. Finding your emotional clarity. So, the crucial point is this. It is absolutely vital to remember that the no-contact deadlock is not a competition, and there is zero winner in a standoff where both people are just standing entirely still. True clarity, which, remember, your ego, the phantom attachment, and the surveillance loop are all actively working together to prevent, requires you to finally drop the act. You have to stop performing the breakup for some invisible audience, and you have to start actually finishing it for yourself. I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. The most psychologically sophisticated thing a person can do after a relationship ends is not to hold out and win the silence. Will you stay frozen trying to win a game that literally has no prize, or will you outgrow the need to play it entirely? That choice, and ultimately your freedom, is entirely up to you. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this helps you find your own clarity.